My daughter looked at me from across the polished mahogany table, her eyes wide with a hungry kind of expectation. Her husband, Mark, sat beside her, giving me a tight, encouraging smile that didn't reach his eyes. After 15 years, 15 long, empty years of deafening silence, this was the moment they had engineered. This was the reason for the silky smooth invitation, for the ridiculously expensive restaurant, for all the fake pleasantries about my health and my home. She had finally finished her whole desperate speech, a rambling pitch filled with buzzwords about a wellness app that was sure to be the next big thing. Her voice trembled with manufactured passion. And at the end of it all was the real point. The ask. $500,000. I let her words hang in the heavy air between us, a sour note in the symphony of clinking glasses and quiet chatter. I thought about all the unheard voicemails and the returned birthday cards. I looked at the stranger wearing my daughter's face. Then I smiled. A small, sad, and powerful thing. I leaned forward just enough so she could see my eyes were clear, and I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake, the money is already gone. But what I told her next, about where and why I'd given it away, was the real reason her world fell apart that night. Before I explain how I turned their greedy ambush into my final lesson, welcome to Granny's voice. If you believe that respect is earned, not inherited, take a moment to subscribe. Now, let's go back 15 years, to the day the silence began. 15 years. It sounds like a lifetime when you say it all at once, but it passes one quiet day at a time. The silence didn't start with a bang. It started with the slam of my own front door. It began in my kitchen, a room that had always been filled with the scent of baking bread and laughter. My daughter, Anna, barely a year into her marriage with Mark, stood before me. He was there too, leaning against the counter with a slick smile, all charm and cheap cologne. They had spread papers across my small wooden table, an aggressive takeover of my quiet space. It was a business plan for some grand, ridiculous idea, a boutique hotel in a town that didn't even have a proper grocery store. To make this fantasy a reality, they needed me to co-sign a loan. For $250,000. My heart dropped like a stone. I looked at my daughter, my brilliant girl, and saw the reflection of this man's empty dreams in her eyes. I couldn't do it. I couldn't chain her future to his failure. I explained, my voice shaking, that I couldn't sign. But what I could do, I told them, was give them everything I had. My entire life's savings, $10,000, scraped together from years of early mornings at my bakery. I slid my bank book across the table. It wasn't a rejection. It was an offering. It was everything. They looked at it, like I'd offered them dirt. Anna's face, once full of hope, turned to ice. I can't believe you, she whispered. Mark dropped the act. His smile vanished. We come to you with a real opportunity, he spat, and you treat us like children. You're a dream killer, Eleanor. He didn't have to say another word. Anna just nodded, her jaw tight. And they left. The slam of the door echoed for a long, long time. For the first 5 years, I lived with a ghost. I kept Anna's childhood bedroom just as she'd left it. I'd go in every week, dust the little porcelain horse on her nightstand, and smooth the wrinkles from her faded floral bedspread. I was keeping the room ready, but really, I was just keeping my hope on life support. Then one Tuesday, standing in the doorway, I finally accepted the truth. She wasn't coming back. That afternoon, I bought boxes. Packing up your child's life when they're still alive is a special kind of funeral. Each book, each stuffed animal, each silly poster I folded away, felt like a final goodbye. I still sent letters. Every birthday, every Christmas. I'd pour my heart onto the page, telling her about my little bakery, about the stray cat I'd taken in, about how much I missed her. For a few years they just vanished into the void. Then they started coming back. I'll never forget the first one. It landed on my doormat with a soft thud. My own handwriting looked back at me, but it was the giant, angry red stamp that screamed, "Return to sender." It felt more violent than a slap. So, I built a life inside the silence. My bakery became my world. The pre-dawn ritual of kneading dough, the warmth of the ovens on a cold morning, the friendly faces of my customers, it became my family. My days were simple, and my joys were small. The first ripe tomato from my garden, my cat purring on my lap, the satisfaction of a perfectly baked loaf. It wasn't a sad life. It was a quiet life, a dignified one, built from the ashes of what they had burned down. The source of the money wasn't a lottery ticket. It was an act of love. That $10,000 they'd scorned, I invested it. A dear friend's husband had passed, and he'd always sworn by one tiny obscure tech company. To honor his memory, I put the money there and forgot about it. For over a decade, it just sat. Then came the news of a corporate buyout. My small gesture of remembrance, my insulting little nest egg, had bloomed into a fortune I could barely comprehend. The rumor spread through the family grapevine like a fire. And then, after 5,475 days of silence, my phone rang. The shrill sound was so unfamiliar I jumped. On the little screen was a name I hadn't seen in 15 years, Anna. For one stupid, breathtaking second, my heart soared. Maybe, I thought. And maybe this is it. Her voice was like honey, thick and sickly sweet. "Mom, it's me. I've missed you so much." There was no apology, no explanation, just a hollow performance. I held the phone, my knuckles white, my mind screaming, "Don't you dare fall for this." Then came the pivot. "So," she said, her voice dropping a little, "we heard some crazy news about your good fortune." And there it was. The hope in my chest fizzled out, leaving a cold, hard stone in its place. She invited me to the most expensive restaurant in the city. "We want to celebrate you, Mom," she chirped. "We'll catch up. It'll be just like old times. Just like old times." The words echoed in my head. The last time we'd spoken about money, I was a dream killer. Now that I had millions, I was Mom again. I hung up the phone, and the silence of my little house rushed back in, heavier than ever. My heart was broken all over again, but this time something else was there too. A cold, clear question. What was I supposed to do now? My feelings were a tangled mess, but my mind was starting to work. I needed to talk to someone. Not a friend who would just give me a hug. I needed someone who understood exactly what was at stake. I hung up the phone, and the silence in my small house was a physical thing. It pressed in on me, heavier and colder than it ever had before. For years, the quiet had been a dull ache, a constant companion I had learned to live with. But now, it felt different. It was the silence of a tomb, the confirmation that the daughter I had known was truly gone, and in her place was a stranger who only spoke the language of money. I walked into my living room, the last rays of the afternoon sun filtering through the dusty windows. I knelt and pulled the old cardboard box from under the side table, the one neatly labeled, "Anna, returned." I lifted the lid. There they were. 15 years of my heart, packaged in cheap envelopes. I ran my fingers over the crisp paper, the sharp edges of the stamps. Each one was a tiny paper cut on my soul. A birthday card from her 40th. A Christmas letter with a photo of my cat, Mittens. A simple, "thinking of you" note. All of them unread, untouched by the person they were meant for. The hurt was so deep it was breathtaking. It wasn't just the greed. I think I could have understood greed. It's a simple, ugly human emotion. This was something far worse. This was the cold, hard proof that her love had been a line item on a budget. When I had nothing to offer, I was worth nothing. Now that I was wealthy, I was worth a phone call. I was worth a fancy dinner. My value as a mother hadn't changed. My bank account had. I sat there on the floor, the letters in my lap, and I let the sadness wash over me. I had to feel it all. One last time. My heart was a tangled mess of grief and anger, but my mind was starting to work through the fog. I needed to talk to someone, not a friend who would just give me a hug and tell me my daughter was a monster. I already knew that. I needed someone with a clear head, someone who understood the numbers and the stakes. I needed someone who could see the whole board. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for my financial advisor, Mr. Davies. He was the one who had helped me navigate the shock of the windfall, a sharp but deeply kind man with gentle eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he listened. His voice was calm and steady. "Eleanor, how are you?" My own voice trembled as I recounted the phone call. I told him about the 15 years of silence, the sudden invitation, Anna's sickly sweet tone, and the unspoken demand hanging in the air. I told him everything. When I was finished, a single raw question escaped my lips. "Mr. Davies?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Am I being cruel if I just say no?" He was silent for a moment, and I could picture him on the other end, leaning back in his leather chair, processing it all. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm, but full of empathy. "Eleanor," he said, and the way he said my name made me feel seen. "For 15 years, they made you feel worthless because you wouldn't finance their fantasy. They cut you out of their life over it. Now they want to celebrate you, because a stock you bought with that same money paid off. This isn't about cruelty, this is about teaching a long overdue lesson in consequences. It's your money." He paused, letting the words sink in before he delivered the final life-altering line. "You control the narrative. You control the narrative." The phrase hit me like a bolt of lightning. The low, melancholic hum in my soul stopped. Suddenly, everything was sharp and clear. My sadness didn't burn away into hot anger. No, it was something far more powerful. It was like watching water freeze, transforming from something formless and fluid into something hard, solid, and crystal clear. Something I could stand on. I looked from the phone in my hand to the portfolio statement sitting on my desk. The numbers on that page weren't just money anymore. They were power. They were my voice. They were the narrative. And I, for the first time in a very long time, was going to be the one to write the ending. He was right. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the silent partner in their lives, and my investment had been 15 years of my own heart. It was time for them to see what it was worth. My hand was steady now. I picked up the phone and called my daughter back. She answered on the first ring. "Anna," I said, and my voice was perfectly calm, without a single tremor. "I'd love to come to dinner. I can't wait to hear what you have to say." When I walked into the restaurant, the air itself felt heavy with money. Gilded mirrors reflected the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers, making the whole room glitter like a jewelry box. The clinking of silver and the murmur of quiet conversations were a world away from my little bakery. Anna and Mark were already at a pristine table in the corner, a perfect picture of anticipation. As I approached, Mark shot up from his chair, his movements a little too quick, a little too eager. He pulled my chair out with a flourish. "Mom, you look wonderful." Anna smiled, a brittle painted-on thing. "That dress is beautiful, Eleanor." It was a simple navy dress I'd owned for years. They'd never noticed it before. I smiled back, a calm, neutral expression I had practiced in the mirror. "It's lovely to see you both, too." I knew my role in this performance. I was the wealthy matriarch, finally brought back into the fold. Theirs was to be the doting, long-lost family. We were all actors in a poorly written play, and I was just waiting for the final act. The small talk was excruciating. They asked about my garden, about my cat, about the bakery they hadn't set foot in for over a decade. They went through the motions, but their eyes kept flicking around the opulent room, their smiles tightening every time a waiter passed. They were like children waiting for dessert, barely able to sit still through the main course. I gave them polite, simple answers, letting the silences stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. I could feel their impatience growing, a frantic energy building just beneath their calm exteriors. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Mark leaned forward, the pretense falling away. "Mom," he began, his voice dropping into a serious, confidential tone. "The real reason we wanted to have you here tonight is because we have an incredible opportunity." He slid a sleek iPad across the white tablecloth. On the screen was a logo for something called Tranquil You. It was another one of his half-baked ideas, some sort of wellness app with guided meditations and calming soundscapes. I listened with perfect stillness as he and Anna launched into their pitch. They used words like synergy, and monetization, and market disruption. They spoke of a future where everyone would be using their app, and they, its creators, would be titans of industry. I nodded along. I didn't interrupt. I let them build their entire fantasy in front of me, brick by imaginary brick. I watched the greed swimming in their eyes, so raw and obvious it was almost pitiable. They saw me not as a person but as a key, the one thing that could unlock the future they felt they were owed. When they were finished, the iPad lay between us, glowing with their entitlement. Mark leaned back, his work done. "So, what do you think?" he asked, his smile wide and certain. "A small investment for your own family." This was it. The moment the entire evening had been built for. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up my glass of water. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The silence stretched. The faint chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade into a low hum. I placed the glass back on the table, the small click echoing in the stillness I'd created. I looked at my daughter, then at her husband, and I began. $500,000, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the table with perfect clarity. "That's a lot of money." I paused. "It's funny. The last time we spoke about money, the number was much smaller. It was my entire life savings. $10,000. I saw a flicker of irritation in Anna's eyes. This wasn't part of their script. "You said I didn't believe in you," I continued, my gaze steady. "And for that, you gave me 15 years of silence." I let each word land before delivering the next. 15 birthdays without a card. 15 Christmases without a call. 15 years of letters, returned to my doorstep, unopened. Anna paled. Mark's confident smile began to falter. "You heard I got rich," I went on, "and you assumed it was a lottery ticket. A lucky accident that fell into my lap." I shook my head slowly. "It wasn't. After you slammed my door and walked out of my life, I took that $10,000, the money you called an insult, and I invested it. On a whim, to honor a dead friend, I put it all into a small tech company nobody had ever heard of. The very money you refused, the money you threw back in my face. It became the foundation of everything I have today." The transformation on their faces was terrifying to watch. The greed dissolved into confusion, which then curdled into pure, horrified shock. They looked as if the floor had just vanished from beneath them. They were finally seeing the truth, not as a story, but as a consequence. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but it was sharper than any shout. "So when you ask me if I'll invest in you, the answer is no. I've already made my investment." I let that hang in the air for one final brutal moment. Last week, I finalized the paperwork. The entirety of that stock portfolio, $7 million, has been placed into a charitable foundation in my name. Its sole purpose is to fund scholarships for young entrepreneurs who have nothing but a good idea and the courage to see it through. I looked directly at Anna, at the ghost of the little girl I once knew. "That money is gone," I said, my voice soft but final. "I gave it away." The silence that followed was absolute. It was no longer my lonely silence, it was their stunned, suffocating silence. Anna's mouth was slightly open, her face as white as the tablecloth. She was speechless. Mark's face turned a blotchy, furious red. He sputtered, his voice cracking as it rose. "You did what? You gave it away? Are you insane?" His outburst was meaningless noise. I didn't even flinch. His power over me was broken. Slowly, I stood up. My movements were calm, my composure perfect. From my simple purse, I took out 3 crisp $20 bills and placed them gently on the table. "That should cover my meal," I said, my voice returning to a normal conversational tone. "It seems, after all, you invited me here to celebrate my success, not yours. Enjoy your dinner." And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked past the gilded mirrors and the glittering chandeliers, my sensible shoes quiet on the marble floor. I could feel their eyes on my back, but for the first time in 15 years, their judgment meant nothing. A weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying had lifted from my shoulders. As I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a new kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. It was free. Walking away from that restaurant was like stepping out of a storm I didn't even know I was still in. The cool night air felt clean against my skin, and with every step I took toward home, I felt a 15-year-old weight lifting from my shoulders. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in a very, very long time. The 6 months that followed were a quiet rebirth. The silence in my house was no longer lonely, it was peaceful. My life, once defined by what was missing, was now filled with new purpose. My foundation awarded its first scholarship to a brilliant young woman from the local university. A chemical engineer with an idea for creating biodegradable plastics from farm waste. I met her for coffee, and as she spoke, her eyes shining with passion and intelligence, I saw a drive and integrity I had once desperately hoped to see in my own daughter. When I shook her hand, I wasn't just funding a business, I was investing in a better future. My friendship with Mr. Davies blossomed too. We stopped talking about portfolios and started talking about books and gardening. We'd meet at my little bakery on Tuesday mornings, and he'd tell me about his grandchildren, while I'd show him pictures of my prize-winning roses. It was a simple, easy friendship, built on respect, not need. And in the spring, I finally took the trip I'd always dreamed of. I went to Italy. I spent 2 weeks sitting in sun-drenched squares, sketching ancient fountains in my notebook, not for anyone else, but for the simple joy of it. I ate pasta that tasted like sunshine, and drank wine that tasted like the earth. I was on my own, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't lonely. I was just free. Of course, the story with Anna and Mark wasn't quite over for them. I heard through the family grapevine that they tried to legally challenge the foundation. They hired a lawyer and claimed I was mentally unfit, that I'd been manipulated into giving my money away. It was a desperate, ugly final act. The court dismissed their case in under an hour. I haven't heard a single word from them since. Their silence this time is a gift. It's funny. For 15 years, I thought my daughter had taken everything from me. My hope, my future, my sense of family. I let her absence carve out a hollow space inside of me. But sitting at that dinner table, watching the greed flicker in her eyes, I realized she couldn't touch the most important things, my integrity and my self-worth. Those were mine. And they weren't for sale. In the end, they didn't want a mother, they wanted a bank. And when I finally understood that, the choice became simple. I chose to invest in a world of people who actually deserved it. I chose to invest in a future built on good ideas and hard work. Most importantly, I chose to invest in myself. Thank you for being a part of this story. If you believe in the power of choosing your own family, I hope you'll subscribe to Granny's Voice. We'll see you next time.